right, well, hello and welcome. Thanks, y'all, for being here today. We are going to get started with our discussion. I'm really excited for this panel discussion and this Q&A on comprehensive sex ed and on Referendum 90 in Washington State. So we have a really great group of panelists tonight that I'm super excited to hear from. You'll get a chance to meet them in just a minute. And first, I wanted to share a couple of logistics for how the meeting is going to work today. Everyone's going to be muted and your cameras are going to be turned off during the panel discussion. Our panelists are the only folks who have video and audio. But we do really want to make sure that we get feedback from you. So there is a way to do that. We are not going to have the chat feature open. We're going to use the Q&A for questions. So you'll notice at the bottom of your screen that there is something called Q&A. If you click on it, that will send a message in, a question into me, and then I can find a place to fit that in when we have opportunities to ask our panelists. So please feel free to submit any questions you have or thoughts that you want to share. We also are going to be recording this event. The recording has started, but that's also one of the reasons we have folks' video and things off, so that that's not going to capture anyone's face or their name without their permission. And when you submit things through the Q&A, you have the option of doing it anonymously, so that that won't even show up to me as the moderator. So if you want to send in Q&As anytime throughout, that is great, but we are also going to try to set aside a bit of time rather at the end to have a little bit more of an open Q&A if there's things we haven't been able to answer throughout the conversation. So we also wanted to start off with a quick interactive poll from some folks. So I would love to invite Jessica to launch one of those polls for us. So these are going to pop up on your screen and you can vote. These are also anonymous. The first one that Jessica is going to launch for us, you'll see it there, is overall, how would you rate your experiences learning about sexual health in school? Great, good, bad, terrible, or I didn't learn about sexual health. Okay, we're seeing results coming in, bit of a mix. All right. So it looks like 67% of folks said that they got good sex ed, which is great to hear, and 33% said that they got bad sex ed. That is a pretty usual range. And also, I think a lot of things, like, it depends on where we grew up, when we grew up, right? Sex ed has changed a lot, which is one of the things I'm excited for us to talk about tonight, because we have folks who see and work with sex ed in a variety of ways. So we're going to launch one more poll for y'all today. So go ahead and launch that if you would please, Jessica. And that is, what type of sex ed did your school offer? Comprehensive sex ed, which includes birth control, abstinence, condoms, consent, and more. Abstinence-only sex ed, which talked about abstaining from sex, but not about birth control or condoms. Or maybe sex ed wasn't offered, or it was offered, but you didn't take it. All right, got our votes coming in. Looking like most folks received comprehensive sex ed, which is great to hear. And some folks saying that sex ed was offered, but that they didn't take it. We do know that sometimes folks move around, or they may opt out of sex ed classes, but it's great to hear that a lot of folks were getting that comprehensive sex ed. So I would love to jump in now with our panelists, and I'm going to invite each person to introduce themselves with their name, their pronouns, and their connection to our sex ed conversation tonight. So I'm going to ask Elsie to start, and then we'll go alphabetical order to Jessica, Kim, and then Shannon.
Hi everyone, my name's Elsie Elling. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Southwest Washington field organizer for Planned Parenthood Votes Northwest and Hawaii. So we have been working on helping advocate for this legislation that was passed earlier this year around the comprehensive sex ed bill that I'll talk about later. And now we're working on the referendum around the comprehensive sex ed bill.
Hi, my name is Jessica. My pronouns are she, her. I am a parent with kids that are LGBTQ, and I also am a parent in the Battleground School District who our district's been working on getting a new sex ed curriculum over the past 2 years, and we're still going through the process. And in the mix of all that, I did connect with Planned Parenthood to help, as a citizen on the SB 5395.
Hi guys, my name is Phan, and I use she, her pronouns. As a sexual assault survivor and sex ed advocate, I've learned and seen firsthand how vital comprehensive sex ed can be in preventing sexual abuse, and so that's why I'm here today, and that's why I think it's so important.
And my name is Shannon Cotton. I use she, her pronouns. I am a middle school 6th through 8th health and fitness teacher in the Camas School District. So I've been teaching sex ed now for 18 years.
Wonderful. Thanks, y'all. I realized that I didn't introduce myself. My name is Austin Lee, and I use they and them pronouns, and I will be moderating tonight. And I am a volunteer with the Rainbow Support Coalition in Clark County, which is helping to put this on. So to start us off tonight, I would love to have Elsie help orient us a little bit. So wondering if you could help orient us a little bit to how folks can support LGBTQ affirming comprehensive sex ed, sort of like what is this law that recently was passed?
Yeah, so SB Senate Bill 5395 is the comprehensive sex ed bill that was passed earlier this year, before COVID. It feels like forever ago, but the legislature at the state level passed a mandatory comprehensive sexual health education for all public school districts to provide. So like you mentioned, it is supposed to be inclusive of all LGBTQ students. The exact bill language is saying to be inclusive of students regardless of their protected class status, which includes gender and sexual orientation, but it's also nice to remember that it does include race, religion, and disability status as well. So it really is inclusive on all of the levels. And the bill works to make sure that learning targets are met around sexual health, including, sections of self-identity, which can include respecting folks' different self-identities, understanding the influences on how society, familial, and individual levels are influencing our gender and sexual orientations, and then also explaining what different gender and sexual orientations are. So that's a little bit about the bill and how it's specifically inclusive of LGBTQ students.
Great. And then could you speak just a little bit to what does it mean when we talk about comprehensive sex ed? We saw a poll question with some examples, but could you share more about what that means?
Yeah, so in the bill, it defines comprehensive sexual health education as reoccurring instruction. So not just something that you get, randomly in maybe middle school or randomly maybe in high school, but it's a reoccurring instruction that includes human development and reproduction, as well as prevention. And it's medically accurate, it's age appropriate, and it's inclusive of all of those different protected classes that I mentioned. And something that's really exciting about this bill specifically is that it includes affirmative consent and bystander intervention, which to me really rounds out the comprehensive nature of this bill.
That's great. Thanks for helping clarify that. I know that comprehensive doesn't always explain that fully to us, so thank you for really clarifying that. I know that there's been a lot of sort of misinformation, especially if you look at social media and some community gatherings about what the law does. Do you want to dispel any myths or kind of speak to any worries that folks might have about the legislation, about the law?
Yeah, there have definitely been a lot of myths put out there, especially on social media, but I just like to remind folks that this bill does outline age-appropriate comprehensive sexual education. So in K through 3rd grade, our students will be learning social emotional learning skills, so no sexuality content or anything like that. And then, everything from there on, the K through 5 is your typical puberty lessons that I know I got as a 4th and 5th grader. And then in middle school and high school, it's age appropriate human development and reproduction. So I'm sure Shannon isn't teaching the 6th graders the same thing as she's teaching her 8th graders, and she'll, I'm sure, talk more about that, but really do like to dispel that myth. The other two that come to mind is that there is no one curriculum that is being mandated. It's a set of learning standards that OSPI has set forth, and then there are a variety of curriculum and instructional material that can fit those learning standards that OSPI leaves for everyone. So it's up to the individual school district in charge to review and adopt curriculum that they think fits their community best. And then parental choice is still an option. So parental choice is actually affirmed and put better into the bill. I think it fully outlines that parents have the right to opt their children out of this instruction, and it makes it so that school districts must obey the parent's choice in that.
Great, and we did just get our first Q&A. Somebody's wondering if this bill will be in effect only in public schools or all schools in Washington State. Are you able to speak to that?
That is a great question. It is all public school districts. So if they are a public school, charter schools also we've found to fall under that, but all public schools. So if you're a private school, you don't have to follow it.
Okay, so that's great information. So yeah, we'll be in place, and then it's supposed to be. When is this law taking effect?
It's also a great question. So for this school year, school districts that are already providing comprehensive sex ed, which is around 60-ish% of school districts across the state, just need to make sure that they are adding affirmative consent and bystander intervention training. And then next school year, for the 2021 school year, the 6th through high school, all school districts must implement and adopt a curriculum. And then they have until the 2022 school year to adopt any curriculum for that elementary school age.
Great, okay, well thanks. And just to mention, Elsie mentioned the OSPI, which is the Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction. So if you do search for that on the internet, you can find it. There's lots of great information posted on the OSPI website. And then last, Elsie, I'm curious, so now can you help orient us to what R90 is and how Referendum 90 fits into this discussion?
Yeah, so Referendum 90 is because the Senate bill was passed earlier in March in Washington, with enough signatures gathered, citizens can refer a bill passed by the legislature to our individual ballots in November for all Washington voters to vote on. So a good example of this happening in previous years was in 2012, the same-sex marriage bill was passed by the legislature and then was referred to the Washington voters, and we voted to affirm that bill. We voted to approve that bill, and same-sex marriage was legalized in 2012 at the state level. So we want to be working to approve Referendum 90 in order to approve the legislation that was passed and approve comprehensive sex ed for all of our public schools.
Thank you. Such great information, and thank you folks in the Q&A for dropping those questions in. I would love to turn now to Shannon. Shannon, you have been a champion for age-appropriate and consent-based sex ed in your school district. So I'm wondering if, as a middle school teacher, you can share with us what does age-appropriate consent-based sex ed look like in your middle school classrooms?
Yeah, so I teach, like I said, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, so it does look different depending on the age group that I'm working with. But basically, to me, the curriculum that we have, the age appropriate, comes into when we're dealing with topics that are relevant to their development at whatever age group it is. It teaches them information and skills that help to answer questions that they have because it's something that is going on with their body or their world that they're living in. It builds upon the following year, so you kind of touched on the comprehensive part of comprehensive, but that is really important. You know, we focus in 6th grade on more of the anatomy. they get those puberty lessons in 5th grade, but so many of them are just, deer in headlights at that age. So it's kind of, and now, they've lived a whole another year. And so their bodies are changing and their brains are changing, and they're middle schoolers now. And so we do a lot of reviewing of that and naming those parts and giving them that vocabulary that's really important for them to have, and the hygiene piece. And then as they move into 7th grade, once they kind of have the reproductive system and the anatomy part, then they can really start to comprehend the pregnancy and development. You have to understand how your body works before you can understand how people are made. And so then we get into that portion. And then 8th grade is really where we get into the sexually transmitted diseases and the consent. We talk about consent at all 3 ages, but we really hammer it in 8th grade as they move on to high school, and they start dating and they move into those relationships. And so really teaching the consent as a base and not as an outlier, which is new in the last few years. And I was so happy to see that as part of that Senate bill.
Thank you. That is such helpful info, and I really love the way that that schools are thinking about how to stage things and how to build learning on top of other learning, and in particular that piece around talking to them about pregnancy, STI risk, and consent. Perhaps before they're in a relationship, a dating relationship, or before they're sexually active, right? To sort of set that groundwork for them, which if we had a high school teacher here, I'm sure they appreciate all that work you're doing to prepare them for 9th grade health class or 10th grade health class.
Yeah, I think it's just really important. We want to get kids information before they're actually making decisions that could potentially change their lives. And so getting them that information earlier is important. So middle school is a really important time for sexual health.
So in your experience, what does it look like to be LGBTQ inclusive in a middle school setting? And have you heard from any students about some positive impacts of being inclusive of LGBTQ people?
Yeah, that's a great question. Students in our classrooms are diverse. There's so much diversity. And so it's really important that they see themselves or a representation of themselves in the curriculum that they're learning, even if it's just reading a scenario or reading a sentence. It's just really important for them to see that represented in what they're learning. Test questions, having it be a same-sex couple, and having that be the scenario that they're reading. Something as simple as that can really be affirmative for a student who is LGBTQ. Promoting the use of pronouns, and Austin, you have been in my classroom, and I slip up, but just making them aware that oh shoot, I'm really sorry, but just affirming the fact that your identity is really important to me, and I want to make sure that you know that, giving them that safe space. I have had students in the past that have said that they appreciated even something as simple as just seeing the safe space sticker that I have. And I champion that through my school too. I try to make sure that all of the teachers have those so that the students feel safe in every classroom that they're in. Asking students their pronouns just kind of helps them, I think, feel seen and gives them a space to be themselves. And so, yeah, I think that those students, every single student needs to feel like they have a place or a person to turn to in a school. And so I'm given that opportunity to be that person, which is pretty cool.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for supporting your students in that way. That is really helpful. And we have 2 questions that came in. So one was about what does it look like to teach affirmative consent? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So I've actually had the privilege of having Austin come in, and they do a fabulous job of teaching kids that they need to have a very clear understanding of what consent means. And my students leave with that understanding. So that it's not just, well, I think they're kind of into it. It is, I know that they want this, or I know that they don't. And so that there's no question. There's no falling back on, well, you know, I just assumed. There's no assumptions when it comes to relationships in that way.
Yeah, that's great. I think creating that clarity for young people is so important, right? And giving them some space to talk about that. And really at that young age, even if they're not dating, that seems like a great conversation to be having. So someone chimed in also wondering when the LGBTQ sex ed, specifically about safe sex, would be implemented in classroom curricula. So I think, Elsie, you were saying before that there was a staged timeline. Do you want to address that? When would that be happening with the LGBTQ sex ed, specifically about safer sex?
Yeah, so if I'm understanding the question correctly, that curriculum that is LGBTQ inclusive, which does include safe sex practices, would be implemented in school districts that aren't already providing that in 2021 school year. And so next September.
Yeah, and that's a good point too, Elsie, is that a lot of schools in Washington already had adopted comprehensive sex ed. Do you happen to know about how many in the state already were practicing comprehensive sex ed?
Roughly around 60% were already providing that.
Okay. So a lot of school districts probably have a lot of experience with this. I know, Shannon, you've done a lot of great work advocating within your district to get folks prepared for doing that great work, and they have been for a while now. Shannon, just to come back to you, I have a soft spot in my heart for middle schoolers. I think they're wonderful. You know, oftentimes, like we said, we hear myths or misinformation about sex ed, and sometimes we focus on those things. But I'm curious what some of the positive impacts have been of sexual health education on your students. Like, what are some things maybe we're not hearing about?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, we know the statistics of comprehensive sexual health prevents dating violence, and it actually delays sexual initiation, which is a fear for some people that, you know, if you teach them how to do this, then they're going to do it. Like, well, one, we're not teaching them how to do anything. We're teaching them to make good choices for themselves. We're giving them information so that they can make an informed decision later. And actually that works with kids in all sorts of topics, just the same way as if I'm teaching about drug prevention and we talk about drugs, they're not going to go out and do drugs, or suicide prevention or anything else. It helps them to develop healthy relationships, and I've had students come back and talk about how you know, learning about consent or learning about their body actually helped them to make those better decisions in high school or in college when that came about. It obviously reduces unplanned pregnancies and other STIs, HIV. One of the really important things I think about making comprehensive health education available to even more students is in even the littler kids. While we wouldn't be teaching them the same types of topics, I think it's really, really important to give students vocabulary, to give kids the vocabulary to be able to say when something is happening to them that shouldn't be happening. I think that prevents a lot of unfortunate situations for kids that could be prevented. And so another thing is that I hear a lot from students is, you know, talking about sex and talking about sexual health and talking about feelings and emotions that are behind it. You know, you hear a lot of people say that when they went through sex ed, it was, you know, don't do this, don't do that. And you know, when you hear like, don't do this and don't do that, you automatically want to, because what is the mystery behind it, right? But if we just talk about it and we have those conversations and we give kids that knowledge and that information, it demystifies it and it makes it not taboo, and it kind of becomes no big deal. and yet they are armed now with that information to make those better decisions for themselves later.
Again, that is just such wonderful, wonderful work that our teachers are doing. So I'm really glad that this bill is here to support that and give them more options for doing that with their students. I do want to jump to Kim, actually, to hear from you. So as a person who recently graduated from a school here in Clark County, you have some experience you can share with us. So I would love to start by asking you to share about your experiences or your friends' experiences with sex ed at schools here in our area. Maybe some things you wish had been different, or what did you really appreciate?
Okay, that's great. So actually, so my first year of high school, I didn't attend any Clark County like public schools, but that's where I learned my sex ed. But like my friends that went to like all the public schools, when they learned sex ed, they never learned about, or sometimes they didn't even have sex ed in their health classes, but they never learned about affirmative consent. And with affirmative consent, like with comprehensive sex ed, it actually really teaches a lot about like abstinence, like the campus teacher was talking about, like it only like helps prevent like unwanted situations and like helps protect and keep people safe. And so that's one thing that I wish was different, that they actually taught that and they made it mandatory like they're going to do now. And the thing that I appreciated the most from like my friends, like, well, I never received it, so I can't really say, but from my friends' experiences, it was never really positive or negative. It was just kind of like they either got it or they didn't get it. And then when they got it, it was never very comprehensive or inclusive. So yeah.
Yeah, so I'm curious, what have been maybe some of the impacts for folks who weren't able to get sex ed at all, or who weren't able to get comprehensive sex ed? Have folks in your community, your friends, talked about sort of how that impacted them?
Yeah, so for my cultural upbringing and for my lack of sex ed, it was just like really difficult to talk about because it was taboo and it never seemed like something natural or respectable to talk about, just because from my family, like I come from an immigrant family, I'm Asian, and so it's just like it's just seen as really like disrespectful to talk about, and like not knowing like the things that I could have known from sex ed. I was put in a lot of unfortunate situations, which did lead me to being sexually assaulted, and actually several of my friends, and it's actually really common for women and to be like sexually assaulted. And so because of their lack of understanding from sex ed, like they just didn't really understand what affirmative consent was, or like what sexual coercion was, or like sexual abuse. And like for me, because I never had sex ed, I had to like Google it. And unfortunately, a lot of my friends had to have those experiences too, where they had to learn from unfortunate events, or they were just like Googling on the internet, but sometimes it's like really negative or it's like misinformation. So it was really confusing for them.
Yeah, well, and thank you for sharing your story. And I'm so sorry that happened, and I'm sorry that happened to your friends. And I really appreciate you being here to be an advocate and speak to the importance of this. I know that you have talked with other groups, other community members about why you support things like consent-based comprehensive sex ed. If you were talking to a parent or another person in our community who maybe was concerned about their child receiving some LGBTQ inclusive comprehensive sex ed, what might you say to them? What might you share with them to help kind of shift that thinking for them?
I would just say that cultivating an environment where we're very inclusive and friendly towards like everybody, like it just makes it safer for people. And like when you all understand each other, it just makes the misinformation and the confusion less. And it's like it only adds more value, and like it benefits like how people interact with each other, and it just like kills like the stigma. And I would just say ignorance is not bliss. It's definitely really dangerous, and it can lead to a lot of violence. And so when people don't have the information, they jump to conclusions, and they don't always make the most informed decisions based on the information that they have. Also, I think every child deserves to be protected, like regardless of their sexual orientation. Like nobody should take away somebody's rights to learn. Everybody should have access to being sexual education.
Thank you, Kim. That is so powerful and such a good takeaway for us as we can share with other folks. We have a couple of questions that came in our Q&A. So one person was just wanting to clarify that for non-public school students, just clarifying that for, say, like a religious school, that, that there aren't going to be any options or requirements for them around the sex ed bill. Is that correct, Elsie, from what you said earlier?
Yeah, that is correct. So any private school, whether they're religious or not, does not have to teach comprehensive sex education. They're not mandated at the state level. I think they could if they wanted to, but it's not a mandate.
Yeah, and then just to clarify too that you mentioned the parental choice, right? That folks could decide that that education isn't what they want for their child and they could opt their child out of that learning.
That is correct. So regardless of if your kid goes to a private school or a public school, public schools in this instance, you can opt your child out of that sex education if you'd rather not have them have it. And you also, as a parent, have the option to get and review the curriculum that will be taught at that grade level. So you can really, see firsthand what your child will be learning and what the teachers will be talking about.
And that's great because I know a lot of folks really just have questions, right? Even folks who are really in support of comprehensive sex ed may still really want to see what that looks like. And that information could be great for parents who want to have conversations with their kids. Might be nice to know what the teacher already talked about so that you can come alongside that and not have to teach it yourself. I know that's true for some families. And then there was another great question. So will there be a system to enforce or evaluate whether the curriculum is being implemented, or is it just sort of within the school districts to evaluate whether the curriculum is in the classrooms or not?
That's a great question. So OSPI, the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, sorry for not saying that acronym out loud last time, they have reviewed a whole slew of curriculum. It's like couple of pages long. You can find it on their website. It's different curriculum as well as different instructional material that maybe isn't a whole curriculum, but maybe focuses on like the consent piece, for example. So they have a whole slew of reviewed curriculum, and they let you know if it meets the standards, if it can be used as a supplemental tool, and what grade levels it's approved for too. So school districts don't have to do that on their own, but they do have the option in this bill to create their own curriculum. So if they wanted to work with a different group in the community and create a curriculum, as long as it meets the learning standards for comprehensive, medically accurate, and age-appropriate, consent-based, and inclusive education, then they can make that, which is really cool.
That is good to know. Yeah, it's nice that schools have options and flexibility to do what's going to work best for their community. So I want to do one more poll for our audience before we jump into our next set of questions for our speakers. Jessica, would you be willing to launch our third poll? All right, so the question is, which of these best describes how inclusive your sex ed was of LGBTQ plus people? So were LGBTQ plus people openly and positively included? Did you only talk about gay and bisexual people, but not transgender or other queer people? Were they not talked about at all? Or were they talked about, but what was said was often negative or hostile? So we've got votes coming in. Looks like many people are saying that LGBTQ people weren't talked about at all, and the other group is unfortunately saying that they were talked about, but in negative or hostile ways. Yeah, unfortunately, that is a reality, and so I think that's one of the great strengths of this law and the supports that it brings, right, is that it does require us to make sure that we're being respectful of all people, regardless of their identity, regardless of their background, and be inclusive of everyone. So circling back just a bit, Elsie, so I really appreciated what Kim just said about why sex ed matters. So I'm thinking about, as we're having conversations with people in our lives about supporting comprehensive sex ed, can you help us, guide us away from any pitfalls we might get into in conversations or towards some more positive ways to make connections?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest pitfalls that we can do is just following the opposition down some of their rabbit holes of myths and things that they've been digging up. They might find one piece of information that's meant for teachers or parents to use as supplemental material and is not intended for use by OSPI or by this bill, and then they twist it into other things. So following them down those rabbit holes can get a little tedious and a little out there. But the other big thing that I want folks to know is to please not engage with their homophobic or transphobic dialogue. That's really harmful to the LGBTQ community and the students that are trying to advocate for getting this type of education. We don't want to be apologetic for being inclusive of LGBTQ plus students. We want to say it loud and proud, and we want to make sure that those students feel supported. So just always being very happy and proud about that. And to, try and add a positive spin when you're having these conversations, sharing our stories like Kim has done and like countless other folks have done really does help humanize the experience of why comprehensive sex ed is important to them and important to our community. And it's also, good to just acknowledge when we see scare tactics happening in the community and try and pivot to the facts and, again, the stories that help add that positive spin and help dispel any myths. And something that I always like to remind folks is that we need to remember to trust our teachers. Shannon here is an amazing teacher, and I know many amazing teachers in this community, and they're not going to be teaching our students something that isn't appropriate, and we can trust them to do the right thing and know that the curriculum also teaches the right thing as well. So I have a lot of trust in the teachers in our community.
Definitely, yes. We are blessed to have so many great teachers in our community who are really working hard to do the best they can for students, especially right now. So thank you, teachers. I want to invite Jessica to share with us. So Jessica, you are a parent in the Battleground School District. And y'all in Battleground School District have been on quite the roller coaster with sex ed. Would you be willing to share a little bit about that experience and maybe about how that's impacted students' access to sex ed and their learning?
Yeah, so our journey started 2 summers ago. It's been a little over 2 years, just trying to get an updated curriculum. And, and going through the whole process that Elsie kind of touched on, like a review, parents reviewing it and all that. And through all the time this takes to get this all done, last year in the fall, the school board had voted to get rid of sex ed altogether, to not teach it at all. And one problem with that that nobody realized was coming when they voted on it was there are AP classes in high school that touch on some of these topics, such as, if I remember correctly, the psychology class will touch on some topics on sex ed, not the whole content, but some things. And so the teachers were like, can we not teach about this now since we got rid of all those topics? And so they had to vote it back in for the students last year. This is pre-COVID, so this was a big crisis then, because everyone was thinking school was going to just go normal. So like not being able to finish your AP class to go to college was really terrified, stressful. And so they did vote it back in. But we still don't have a curriculum. So because we were still going through the curriculum, getting that voted in last year, they did not offer sex ed at all in our school district. And from what I hear, typically sex ed is taught in 9th grade in Battleground. And so any students that took health last year did not have the option of taking sex ed. So if they want to take sex ed in the future, they have to retake the entire health class again, which I can't imagine any kid doing that. And plus they already got credits for it. And so they don't get credits for their graduation requirements. And currently, you need like 6 credits a year. So you already have a full load, like you don't have any wiggle room. So that's been interesting. And then again, this year it's not being offered. So that's 2 years of high school students that largely won't be getting sex ed unless their parents take them somewhere else, which I only know of 2 options, which are not as convenient as a class at their school already.
Yeah, that's a big impact on learning and a big impact on our community, right? For a, you know, a generation of folks to not get sex ed and not have that info. You know, I'm curious too, you mentioned that you were a parent of LGBTQ youth. So I'm curious, sort of what has brought you to this work, this passion that you have for promoting universal access to comprehensive sex ed in your community?
There's lots of things that brought me, you know, but I guess the most recent reason why is before any of my kids came out as LGBTQ, the community I was part of, I was taught that being LGBTQ was wrong. And I had on my own started kind of reconsidering that, like privately just a little bit. And then when one of my kids came out, I'm glad I was reconsidering it already. So it wasn't I wasn't a full shock to them, like, no, you can't. Unfortunately, I wasn't the supportive parent I wish I would have been, because I didn't have the information I needed. And so shortly after my kid came out as LGBTQ, because I was still wrestling with it, you know, like, is this a choice or not? Because that's what I was taught, is it was a choice. And again, I have no material, because I didn't have comprehensive sex ed growing up, you know, so I didn't know that there's science behind this. Actually, when I was in school, there probably wasn't a lot of science on it. But so after a few months after my kid came out, I read science on gender, and I was like, oh, you know, this is real. I could breathe. And some folks from my community didn't know I had changed my mind because I had gotten new information, and they're like, let's go to Battlegrounds, you know, and let's get rid of the comprehensive sex ed. And I was like, oh, well, I didn't tell them. I just showed up to support the sex ed. You know, that was hard to do, and I'm just really glad I did it. And I'm still fairly involved with the school board, supporting LGBTQ students, not just with sexual health education, but, you know, all kinds of, you know, just being affirmed in the school district, and, you know, getting teachers training on just the topic of LGBTQ, or like pronouns, like Shannon had said, you know, because if you are not taught this stuff, you don't know. If you don't practice, when I didn't practice, I flubbed up all the time. Actually, I didn't flub up, I just didn't practice. I kept silent, and that wasn't helpful for my LGBTQ kid. And so I'm willing to practice with people pronouns, or educate them if they need to, because it can be intimidating, you know, this new vocabulary, or, you know, if they practice with me, I don't get, it's not a personal hurt to me, because I am not, you know, my pronouns are, you know, she, her, pretty easy for people. So I don't get upset, because mostly people don't misgender me.
Yeah, and you've been a really strong advocate, and the story behind that shows us kind of, you know, what brought you here, what gives you that fire. And I am curious, as an advocate in your community, how did you start your advocacy journey? Sort of what helped you find success?
So my journey started as an advocate, a school board meeting with my community there, not knowing that I had changed my mind, and I was terrified. And I wanted to bail, but I had a couple of friends sitting next to me. They're like, it'll be fine. And I'm like, oh, they're so lying. It's not going to be fine, but I'm just going to believe this lie. And, you know, I hyperventilated through my whole you usually get 3 minutes to speak at a school board meeting. So my 3 minutes of testimony, at least then, like they had a chair. Nowadays, well, pre-COVID, they got rid of the chair, so you had to stand at a podium. And so I just regularly go to school board meetings, pre-COVID, post-COVID, and I just talk for my 3 minutes about whatever's going on in the school district with my kids, or, you know, specifically because my kids are LGBTQ, or things that they say that their friends in the district are dealing with. And, you know, and then I just educate them on, you know, pronouns. You know, I don't even know. I should have taken a list of what I've talked to them about, because I'm sure I'm cycling through it over and over. And so that's my biggest thing, is going to the school board meetings and talk, or, you know, give my testimony. And I did, like I said earlier, partner up with Planned Parenthood. And I was super grateful when they helped me write my testimony to go to Olympia in 2019. Some of it can be very emotional, you know, when I'm talking about the damage that happened to me because I didn't have comprehensive sex ed, or, you know, why I'm a huge supporter for LGBTQ people, you know, specifically because of my kids. So I'm glad that Planned Parenthood helped me, you know, to make that sound, you know, good, not as an emotional person, you know, because of my story, or an emotional parent. Emotion's good, but you know how, you know, I'll just say, as a mom, I could kind of take it a little too far, where it's like, okay, I'm really trying to say this, sorry about that. So just the school board meetings, and so last time I went up to Olympia, I wasn't stressed at all. And so thank you, school board, for letting me practice on you. Thank you, Planned Parenthood, for helping me out.
Well, and I love that. It's such an inspirational story, right? Is that you came with some friends to a school board meeting, you know, you do your 3-minute testimony, right? Any of us could survive 3 minutes talking, and you built on that, right? To get comfortable to the point where you could talk to the legislature and be the strong advocate that you are. That's such a great inspiration for all of us. And that makes me think, Elsie, you know, with the Referendum 90 campaign and the work that folks are doing in support of comprehensive sex ed, can you share with us some of the ways that folks could be involved in supporting access to comprehensive sex ed?
Yeah, so right now we are focused on the referendum, but I always love to use Jessica as an example of someone who is involved at her local school district, and that can really make such an impact. So after the referendum, assuming that we get this thing approved, school districts are going to definitely be important to get involved with. But right now, the referendum, we are working to approve R90 with the Safe and Healthy Youth Coalition, which is over 60 organizations throughout Washington state. You know, down here in Vancouver, Longview, all the way up to Olympia and Tacoma and Seattle and Bellingham, and then all the way east to Spokane and Walla Walla. We've got such a great reach, which is really exciting. And we are working to really connect with those voters and talk to them about why they should be approving Referendum 90, what comprehensive sex ed is, and why it's important for our kids to get that. So there's lots of different ways to get involved. We're going to be doing things here at the local level in Vancouver, but you can also feel free to, I think Austin put in the chat, our website, and then you can also feel free to share your story with us in our coalition, and follow us on social media as well to really get some updates on what's going on.
Yeah, and yes, I dropped that in there. It's the approved90wa.org website, that if folks want to check that out, that's a good place to get info and to connect. Would that be a good place for folks to connect about the campaign?
Yeah, so that's a great place. You can email us at I think it's info at approved90wa.org, but that's a great place to connect. And then you can also follow us on social media for, I think, you know, some folks are wondering how to get some talking points. Social media, Approve 90 WA is going to have a lot of different great talking points. So definitely follow us on Facebook or Instagram or Twitter. We'll be there.
Great. And then, so for folks who've never been involved in a campaign before, that can sound kind of scary. I'm thinking back to Jessica's experience, right? Of like, what do you mean I have to testify, right? So could you maybe give us a couple examples of what does it look like to be involved in a campaign? And then maybe also if folks aren't able to get involved in a campaign right now, are there other things they can do that are supportive without being part of the official sort of campaign or political process?
Yeah. So on the campaign side, we are really working to have that one-on-one conversation with voters. Due to COVID, it's going to look a lot different than in past years, but we are working to do weekly phone banks where we will be talking to voters on the phone or via text message. And then we're also going to be working on doing some contactless lit drops in our communities, also down here in Vancouver. So not interacting with folks like we would at the doors in normal years pre-COVID, but still giving folks literature to be able to learn more about this referendum and what is going on. So that's like direct action that if you're really into this issue or just like into wanting to get involved in a campaign, that would be a great way to start. And you can definitely reach out to us via that email, and also I'll probably end up being the one to connect with you if you're down here in Southwest Washington. But if you're a little more nervous to get involved, whether it's your first time ever really on a campaign, or maybe you just don't have the capacity time-wise to get involved, there's a lot of great ways. Again, following us on social media, we're all at this point, most of us, I shouldn't say all, but the vast majority of us are on social media in some sort of form. So you can feel free to follow us and share our posts. And then doing some of that relational organizing, talking with your friends and family, coworkers, and everyone in the Washington state that you know, and talking about what comprehensive sex ed means, why it's important to you, and why folks should be approving this referendum. That allows us to reach a whole lot more voters than we would just, by the hand dialing of phones. So relational organizing, everyone has the power to do that, and it's super impactful. And then if you do have the capacity money-wise, we are always looking for donations. Donations do help us get literature to people's doors, and they help make sure that we get on the airwaves and everything like that. I do understand that COVID right now has been an impact on most folks financially, but I do like that there are other ways to get involved, like relational organizing as well. So there's something everyone can do out there.
Good to know. We all can be part of the journey and work the journey in our own way, whether that is calling folks, working with a campaign, or just talking to folks that we already are connected with. I want to remind folks who are joining us today to please drop any questions you have in the Q&A, because we do have about 8 more minutes of time together. And as we wait for folks to add things in, I'd love to circle back to our folks who spoke earlier, see if they'd like to add anything, share anything based off of things that other people might have shared. So Shannon, Kim, Jessica, is anything on your mind you'd like to share with everybody?
Yeah, I'll just add that I think the relational...
Oh, Shannon, your audio is a little rough.
Ooh, sorry.
If you wanted to, Shannon, I believe you're able to drop things in the chat, or we could try your audio one more time. So it looks like Shannon's going to type some stuff in. So Kim, was there anything that was on your mind? Anything you'd like for folks to know?
Yeah, I remember earlier in the previous questions, you asked me through email, if you've noticed or heard any negative impacts of the youth who didn't have access to LGBTQ inclusive comprehensive sex ed. And I was talking to my friends recently who identify as that, and they were just saying it was actually really similar to my story. You had to go on the internet, and they unfortunately it was not always correct information, and then with the taboo of LGBTQ stuff, like homophobia, they couldn't really talk to their parents, and they didn't really have any other resources to go and turn to. So I just noted that that was very similar to my experience and a lot of immigrant families too, because it's just taboo to talk about, and that's kind of like an overlying theme that like persists within I guess people that don't have access to comprehensive sex ed, and this is why it's so important. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for bringing that up. That is really important too, because not all families feel comfortable talking to or are able to talk with the kids in their lives about these things. I know for myself, I grew up in a family where it was not discussed, and so the only information I got was through school. And so making sure that everyone has access through school seems like a really good way to create some equality and some equity for folks who maybe, for whatever reason, don't have an adult in their life who can do that with them. So I see that Shannon wrote in some comments. So Shannon mentioned, I think that the relational piece is so important. I get Facebook friends asking me about the law all the time, and I was able to share facts about the law. Many people didn't realize that what they had heard weren't facts. Getting that info out is so important because people may vote based on what they've heard and not necessarily facts. Definitely. Yeah, so I'm hoping that the information that was shared tonight, the stories and perspectives that were shared tonight are things that we can all take forward and share in the community. And the recording for this will be posted to the Facebook page for Rainbow Support Clark County. And we may chop it up into some shorter little videos so you don't have to watch the whole 55-minute video or ask your neighbor to watch the whole 55 minutes. But we are just really thrilled to have had such a great panel here with us tonight. So Jessica, before we close out, is there anything that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, to piggyback on what Shannon said, as I reviewed the curriculum that Battleground was, that they were trying to get voted and approved, I had heard a lot of misinformation about it that I didn't know was misinformation. And I was kind of fearful. And when I looked at the curriculum they had put together, it was really fabulous. I was really surprised because there were several things that were opposite of what I had heard, So I really encourage parents when their kids go to take sex ed to go down to the school and to review the material. By law, that is your right to do, it's fascinating to find out the new information, and I just so love the social emotional for the K-3. It's like, send my kids back to kindergarten for that. That would be awesome. The kids wouldn't like it, but I think that's a really important thing to be teaching that builds on just all kinds of relationships in life, parental child up through, significant others later in life.
Yeah, and that social emotional learning information is available on the OSPI website if folks want to check it out. It's really interesting, and it's really great to see that they are teaching young folks how to be their own advocates, how to have boundaries, right? How to do all those things that prepare them for healthy friendships, healthy dating relationships, and to be ready for adulthood. So if folks do want more information, you can visit the approve90wa.org website. You can email them at info@approve90wa.org or check them out all over social media. Again, this video is going to be posted, or pieces of it will be posted up to our Facebook page, which is Rainbow Support Clark County. And if anyone has any other questions, I think some of us will be able to stick around for after the recording ends. I want to say thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. So thank you, Shannon Cotton, and thank you to Phan, Jessica Cole, and Elsie Elling. We really appreciate you taking the time and sharing tonight. Thanks, y'all. And thank you to all our participants. We hope y'all have a great night.